Hello everyone, my name is Valentin Schmidt and I have the pleasure of welcoming here Bitcoin core developer Jimmy Song. And Jimmy, as you can imagine, got into Bitcoin a long time ago in 2011, but not because he was interested in the technology at first from his software development angle, but from the economics perspective. He was interested in Bitcoin as a store of value and a medium of exchange, so Bitcoin as money. So I was wondering, Jimmy, how did you get interested in Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, when I first read about it, it was on Slashdot. It said, Bitcoin had broken $1, and I was like, what is Bitcoin? I've never heard of this thing, and why is it important that it broke $1? And how can a Bitcoin have $1? So I looked into it. I read about it. I read as much as I could. And I discovered that it had this 21 million Bitcoin limit. And instantly I was like, okay, I need to get some of this stuff. This is very interesting. And I mean, the fact that it was technological did have something to do with it, but the much more interesting thing to me was that there was a limit and it was enforced by software. And I was like, that's a brilliant economic system. So I looked at it. Of course, it turned out that you couldn't buy it for PayPal or a credit card or anything like that. You had to go through this complicated process at the time. You had to deposit money into Dwolla, and then Dwolla had to transfer money to Mt. Gox, and then you had to buy it on Mt. Gox, and then you had to you had to get it out by transferring Bitcoins to your own wallet. So it was too complicated. So I actually didn't end up buying it $1. I'm very regretful of that. I still remember my wife telling me, I don't know about this thing. I told her all about it that night, and she was like, yeah, I don't know if that sounds kind of like a scam. I was like, I only want to put a few $100s in. She's like, yeah, I don't know. So I ended up not going through with it because it was too annoying until that summer when it hit like $30. I bought some then, but yeah, it was. For me, the economic aspect of it was more interesting in a way than the technology. The technology was an enabler of the economic reality, but the economics were the drawing point for me.
I think that's fascinating because you've been a software developer for 20 years, and you have this divide usually between Bitcoiners where there are the tech people, they love it because of the cryptography and everything, and then you have the money people who get into it because they think it's money. But you as a tech guy actually got into it from the money side, and you said you were reading books about Austrian economics which got you to recognize the value of Bitcoin. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So I think 2008 was sort of an interesting year. I think all the bailouts and things like that were happening, and I decided at that point to learn a little bit more about how the economy works, because all this stuff had happened and there was this justification for pumping like $800 billion into the economy, spending it on almost anything, like anything shovel ready or whatever. And I was a little bit skeptical. I'm like, wait, that can't be right. Like, can you really spend your way out of a recession? Is that even possible? So I started reading up on stuff, and I read some books on economics, and I started getting more knowledgeable about it. And when I saw Bitcoin, I guess you're right. I sort of recognized it for what it was, which was, hey, this is sound money, right? This is something where you can't make more of it, and that was the big draw for me. There's a medium of exchange component that was pretty interesting too. You can send money to Africa in 10 minutes without anything complicated like Western Union, but having the store of value property was far more interesting to me.
What were some of your influences when you started reading and learning more about economics?
Well, Hayek, I read some of Hayek. I think
Friedrich von Hayek.
Yeah.
The Nobel laureate.
Yeah, so he actually has some really good, it's kind of an introduction to libertarian thought, right? Like there were some books, I can't remember the authors, but Austrian economics and libertarian thought kind of go hand in hand, and a lot of it I wasn't exposed to it ever before. Stuff like the idea that you shouldn't restrict people from doing certain things. Like I'd always been against drugs, but the idea that what if you take that restriction away? What would happen, right? Like from an economic standpoint, made more sense to me, right? Like if you stop making it illegal, then the price goes down because there's this enormous, price premium placed on the fact that it's illegal, and things like that just made more intuitive sense to me from an economic standpoint and aligned better with my everyday experience than sort of what the policymakers were telling me, and that's sort of where I got into it.
So Bitcoin as a store of value with a fixed limit on it, 21 million. We haven't even reached that limit yet, but that's what it's going to be. And how does that represent sound money for you?
Bitcoin is sound money because there is a fixed limit. I don't know how else to put it. Because there's a fixed limit, like not everyone can have one, for example, in the world. I recognize very quickly, if you hand it out, like if you spread it out evenly among the entire world population, everyone would have very small fractions of a Bitcoin. So at that point, I was like, okay, well, I better get in first then. and I think that's sort of the right mentality, right? Because if you don't get in first, then you're gonna kind of get left behind. And the fact that demand is always increasing, but supply is fixed, that creates for a really good investment, at least from my perspective. And so I bought what I I kind of wish I bought a lot more than I did. I think everybody in Bitcoin does, but yeah, it was kind of mind blowing when I really read about it.
So Jimmy Song, the software developer, 20 years of experience, gets into Bitcoin because he wants to invest and he likes sound money. But eventually, you did end up as a Bitcoin core developer. So why don't you tell us about your history?
Yeah, sure.
How you became to do that?
Sure. So 2013, I was buying sort of on the run up, and I still remember it was my birthday when Mt. Gox crashed from 266 all the way down to like in the 80s or something like that, and then bounced back and forth and whatever. But that day was kind of a seminal day for me because I realized I really didn't know that much about Bitcoin. As much as I knew the theory and sort of basically how it works, sort of the architecture of Bitcoin, if you will, I didn't really know any of the details. And I realized, okay, well, yeah, if this thing goes up again, I better definitely understand more of it, and I'm going to study it and all that stuff. And sure enough, right around September, October of 2013, it started to go up. And so I was like, okay, well, I really need to study this thing a little more and figure it out. And coincidentally, right around that time, there was an ad on Jobs for Bitcoin, and there was an open source project that was looking for developers, and they had trouble finding developers that would work for free. So this guy was offering some Bitcoins to work, and it's a Python developers wanted. So I said, oh, I'm a Python developer. I can go do this. And he gave me some work, and I started working on the Colored Coins open source project, and that's how I got into it. I learned so much, and I count that, and probably in Bitcoin terms, I probably earned more per hour than I ever have, and probably ever will, is my guess. But yeah, I learned all about Bitcoin through open source contribution that I was kind of getting paid for. I ended up doing like 40 hours of my day job and then coming home and doing 40 hours of, doing the open source project per week. And that was kind of crazy because I was like working 80 hours. And eventually I decided, okay, I got to make this my career. And that's kind of where I ended up.
So so after you got into Bitcoin and you understood its value as sound money, what convinces you in terms of the network, in terms of the technology? Why do you think Bitcoin can be this sound money and can be superior to other competitors?
Yeah, so the big thing that appeals to me now is its antifragility. And Nassim Taleb talks about antifragility in his book, Antifragile. But basically, Bitcoin gains from disorder, and that's what I've noticed. And I've thought about this a lot. It's like, why does it keep going up when there's like sort of crazy things happening to it? Especially with regard to this recent hard fork with Bitcoin Cash. I was like, why is that happening? And I've thought about it, and upon reflection, I've come to the conclusion that the reason is because Bitcoin is being immunized against attack. It's growing from disorder because there are actual developers that are going out there and sort of changing parts of the ecosystem. You could be a core developer, you could be a wallet developer, you could be an exchange developer, you can be a merchant developer, payment processor developer, whatever it is. They're all sort of working to make their part better so that they can withstand these attacks. And as a result, Bitcoin becomes a better store of value. Right? The more immunity it has to other things, the better a store of value it becomes.
The more secure it is.
Yeah, the more secure it is. And as a result, Bitcoin goes up in value as more of these attacks happen, and Bitcoin survives it. Right? It removes an uncertainty about whether or not Bitcoin can survive X, Y, or Z. And one of the things that Nassim Taleb says in his book is that anti-fragile things have an organic quality. And it always confused me. Well, if it really were anti-fragile, how can computer code be anti-fragile? And I realized, yeah, it is anti-fragile and it's organic. It's the developers, right, that are doing all of the immunizing. They're the organic component. And Bitcoin is not just a network of computers. It's also a network of developers and companies and all these other things that are by nature just sort of like flesh and blood, like you and me. And that's where I think the real value of Bitcoin sort of comes from.
Because there's hundreds of people working on Bitcoin Core alone, right? Yeah. Yourself, right? Mm-hmm. And they check each other's software, mm-hmm. and they bounce ideas off each other, and that's the way they improve it, because if we had kept the Bitcoin protocol inorganic, like you say, in the 2009 version, it would have been dead a long time ago, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there were several bugs. I think somebody figured out like an integer overflow error that gave themselves like 92 billion Bitcoin at one point. And that obviously like got rolled back, and they were like, okay, that's obviously a bug, and they moved on. Things like that, like Bitcoin as software just isn't smart enough to handle stuff like that. It has to be people that actually fix it. And that's I think what gives Bitcoin a lot of security value, is because you have all these people watching it, and not just like computer software that's running on its own. It's not Skynet, right? Like it's not super smart trying to do its own thing. It's developers. It's the people that are actually checking the code, watching the network, figuring out like low probability scenarios and how to immunize against those. That's what gives it value. That's what gives it security. That's what makes it a great store of value.
And you say also, in your experience, the quality of the Bitcoin development team mm-hmm. throughout the scope of the network, wallets, mm-hmm. etc., payment providers, core, is better than most of the altcoins, mm-hmm. which is why you think, or the other cryptocurrencies, mm-hmm. which is where you think that Bitcoin has a higher valuation.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely been a correlation that I recognized a while back, which is that if you look at like CoinMarketCap or something like that, the quality of the developers and the price tends to be somewhat correlated. So Bitcoin is obviously the biggest and has the most developers. It's number one. And the second most is maybe Ethereum, and number 3 is right now Bitcoin Cash, and so on. And that makes sense. That makes sense because it's the developers that give it that anti-fragile quality, right? Like they're the ones that can react to attacks on the network. They're the ones that can fix various things. Whereas like, coins that have gone down in value or like moved down the CoinMarketCap charts, well, their developers have sort of abandoned it, or they've since moved on to other things, or aren't very good, or some combination thereof. And that makes sense to me, right? Like I don't know if correlation is necessarily causation or whatever, but the fact that developers sort of give the network security, and the security gives it sort of a store of value property, and that in turn gives it a higher price, that makes sense to me.
It makes total sense, and you would also say that Bitcoin is the only true decentralized cryptocurrency.
I would say so. There's a lot of different implementations of Bitcoin. There's a lot of different nodes and software and wallets. There's all kinds of wallets on the Bitcoin network. you have exchanges. You have this whole infrastructure that's very motivated to make it go, and it's definitely more decentralized than, say, Ethereum or Bitcoin Cash or any of these other ones. Yeah, like a lot of them have foundations, a lot of them have pre-mines, and those are all sort of factors that I would say sort of cause more centralization than there needs to be.
And the whole point, let's not forget about that, about this Bitcoin thing, why it's so novel and so good, is because it is decentralized. Yeah. There's no central bank, there is no government behind it. No, it's basically the market. It's this network of developers and people and users who keep it decentralized, which is why nobody can really control it. And that, again, provides it a better property of money as a store of value, rather than you have a central bank who administers it and then inflates the money supply or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely feel like a lot of altcoins have sort of an authoritarian governance model. And if you look at something like Ethereum after the DAO hack, it was just sort of like, okay, this is what we're going to do. And it was decreed by Vitalik, and that's kind of what happened. And not to say that that's necessarily bad. That may be good for whatever they're trying to do, and more power to them if they want to do that. But that's not decentralized. It's not really sound. Well, Ethereum's not sound money for a lot of reasons, but that's one of the reasons that it would disqualify it, is that there's sort of a central person that you can go to and appeal to and say, okay, let's make another 100 million Ethereum right now. And I guess they could do it. Ripple, suffers from the same problem. They have like this huge storage of ripples that they can release to the market at any point. So yeah, if you have an authoritarian governance model, I don't really see that as very secure or sound. Whereas with Bitcoin, it's very decentralized. I mean, nobody would go along with any sort of raise of the 21 million limit and things of that nature. So in that way, I see Bitcoin as more secure than all these other coins, because there is no single point of failure, if that makes sense. Like Satoshi, I think one of the best things that he did was disappear, because that took away sort of that authoritarian voice that he would have naturally had. And people still appeal to Satoshi all the time, but in a sense, his disappearance kind of led to the decentralization that we see today.
Kind of like George Washington stepping down as president, even though the people urged him to stay on as kind of like a king, but he said, no, we designed this as a republic. Yeah,
that's a great example. It's like, yeah, absolutely, yeah. It take Cincinnatus, I guess, maybe as well, right? Like in ancient Rome, he was asked to be dictator for life, and he's like, nope, I'm going to go back to the farm. And I think that's actually what George Washington cited as a reason. But yeah, that's very much Satoshi. He's our Cincinnatus or George Washington of crypto, I guess. And he was brilliant in many ways, and this is one of the best examples of his brilliance.
So Jimmy, you are invested in Bitcoin not only with your money, but also with your time and your career. And recently you thought, how can I benefit the community and the network that you talked about by also benefiting yourself, so creating a win-win situation. And you identified the quality of the development in general as a sort of needs area where there should be more people, more young people, more coders for the network. So you started your teaching company, Programming Blockchain, where you educate normal software developers to become Bitcoin coders, and you obviously also earn a profit. Why don't you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So like I said, developers are at the heart of what Bitcoin is, right? And really all crypto. And I recognize that almost every company is trying to hire like 10 blockchain engineers or Bitcoin engineers, and there's a very, very small supply. And the people that exist are, the software developers that got into Bitcoin early enough are really rich, so they don't really need to work, or they started their own company, or they're part of another company and they're very happy already because the companies are very motivated to keep them happy. So I decided that that the way to fill that gap is just to train more people, and I do have some background in doing that. So I started the company programming blockchain, and I started last week. Actually, was the first 2-day seminar where I teach everything, right? Like from transactions, blocks, Merkle trees, and ECDSA. I go through a hex dump and show people exactly what everything means, and then show them how to build it by hand, right? Like build an actual transaction. And you know, like you said, I feel like this is a win for everybody. It's a win for the students because they can have a much more lucrative career in blockchain engineering or Bitcoin engineering. It's obviously good for the industry because you know they're getting more Bitcoin developers, and this is a big needs area for pretty much every company. They have recs out for like at least the number of engineers that they already have. So if they have 20 engineers, they have recs for another 20. So, and it's obviously good for me because you know this is something that I like to do. I feel like it's contributing, and also I'm making money. So win-win-win, and that's sort of the direction I want to go. The next one is in LA. One after that maybe in San Francisco, and maybe after that in Asia and Europe. So there's plenty of demand. I do want to sort of restrict it to the people that I think will most likely succeed, because I can't teach like more than 20 people without like reducing the quality of the seminar. So that's the plan, and that's my company, Programming Blockchain.
So Jimmy Song keeping the quantity stable for his students, keeping the quantity stable for Bitcoin as a store of value, and hopefully both of which will succeed. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.